Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the podcast where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters. With me, as always, is the man who was the inspiration for the Alanis Morissette song, You Oughta Know, Mr. Ryan Siebold.
What's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
It's going well. You could say I'm having a whale of a time over here.
Oh, man. That's right.
What a modeling movie. So appropriate to bring this type of energy to a movie about this film of all films, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, we are here to discuss, fittingly, 2022's The Whale. Ryan, do you have a description for us, sir?
I do. This is directed, of course, by the great Darren Aronofsky and shot by Matthew Libatique, his longtime pal. Google has this described as, in a town in Idaho, Charlie, a reclusive and unhealthy English teacher, hides out in his flat and eats his way to death. Spoiler alert. He is desperate to reconnect with his teenage daughter for a last chance at redemption. This was made on a shocking budget of $3 million, even though it takes place in one room, and brought in a box office of $55 million. So Darren Aronofsky gets to go on and make another movie, whether you wanted to or not. So yeah, this was A24. I think this was his first A24 release, if I'm not mistaken. This was based on a story and play by Sam Hunter, which was loosely based on real events in his life. And but he's still alive, so that's cool. He found a way out. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about in this. Normally, Jason, I would say, what did you think about this movie? But I'm going to throw it back to you by saying, are you okay? How you doing, buddy? Everything all right?
Well, dude, I'm going to go ahead and let you know that. But first, do want to remind our audience to go ahead and like this vid, subscribe to our channel. And as we go along, please feel free to leave comments about what we have to say or what you think about some of the elements that we're talking about. We would love to hear from you. Now, yeah, Ryan, I mean, this is an emotional experience. Absolutely. 100%. You know, I think that it's going to be difficult for anybody to say otherwise simply because of both the gravitas as well as the sympathy and compassion that Brendan Fraser brings to his role, but also, you know, he has the most showy role by far, and he's asked to carry the most weight, no pun intended. By the way, I feel like there's going to be so many unintentional puns over the course of this movie. I apologize in advance to all of you.
Oh, man. All right. Yeah.
This is not a film to bring this energy to. Why is this what we're doing? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry, everybody.
Back up here.
I apologize on behalf of my co-host.
But no, I loved this film, and I think that one of the things that I loved about this is, as I was doing some of the research behind it, Aronofsky, who by the way is one of those directors who, at least for me, I constantly forget how great he is and how much of a genius is, because I don't know what it is about his films. They're not necessarily easy to forget, but they don't tend to be films that a lot of people will continually bring up 10, 15, 20 years down the road, like some of his contemporaries. I don't know why that is, because he's a brilliant filmmaker. You know, there was a lot of allusions to The Wrestler, I think, in this film. And, you know, so it's really interesting because it's such an understated, not performance, but an understated direction. And I would say sort of like an understated film where he went on record as saying that with this film, he really just wanted performance, light, and camera to do all of the work. And I think that perfectly summarizes the three big pies on the pie chart of this specific film, you know?
Sure.
How about you?
Yeah, this was a divisive movie. I was emotional in this film. I'm not an emotional person. I bury that shit deep down. And Aronofsky got a shovel and he's like, let's go to work, son. And I was like, damn it. So fuck this movie for making me feel things with my man heart. This was a divisive movie for a lot of people. I would have thought after the film, when I was doing research for this show, that I would get on there, because I remember very distinctly in all the press, Brendan Fraser, of course, got the Oscar, and rightly so. I think he deserved it. And then at the Venice International Film Festival, I believe it was, he got a 6-minute standing ovation, which was like the longest one in history and blah, blah, blah. So he deserved all those things. But I thought I was going to get online and see people gushing about this film. And I saw a lot of the opposite. A lot of people thought this film was a bad movie that was stilted by amazing performances, that the characters were one note. And we're going to get into some of this very quickly, but I really like the movie, but I do understand some of its critics, I would say. But I really like the movie. I don't agree with the critics, but I understand.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll certainly get into that. Yeah, because I definitely didn't feel that way. And so let's go ahead and start here. You know, like I said, in addition to all of those aspects that we just talked about, I think also you have the screenplay that's really doing a lot of the work. So that would be like the fourth element of the pie chart, if you will, that I would say. So those are really the four elements that we're going to focus on. But I think it's pretty widely agreed that the largest slice of the pie by any stretch is going to be the performances, right? A large part of that with Fraser, but then also with the additional performances.
The largest part of that was Fraser, yes.
And I think that the other three do amazing jobs as well. So, but let's go ahead and start with just Fraser's performance, because this actor's performance, whoever's taking on this role of Charlie, is going to be the single biggest determining factor as to whether the movie works or not. I think that's pretty fair to say. And I would say that it's a tremendous performance. You know, he gives everything he has, physically, emotionally, and he's also a bigger dude too. So it makes sense that he would also be that much more imposing with literally 300 pounds of additional prosthetics. That is insane to me. That it's a good thing that he's, you know, well over 6 feet tall with his build to be able to carry all of that, because it's difficult. So, but I would also imagine that it's the type of physicality that informs a performance, right? When you're carrying all that weight, that's got to weigh on you. Oh my God, they're so here all the time. And so as an actor,
when I edit this, Jason, I'm going to put a little tally at the bottom. And go, ding, ding, ding. Carry on.
You know, I'm sure that's something that he's able to, again, it informs the performance because it's like, it's there, you know, you can't escape it. It's this suffocating. And my understanding is also the prosthetics were such that they were really hot, in addition to being really heavy, that he had to have these like cooling systems that they would build underneath and get like ice and all of this stuff to keep him cool. So all of that, you know, you almost wonder if like the scenes where he's sweating on film, like they didn't even need to bring in makeup for that. It's just him, unfortunately, sweating through all that makeup, right? So I think that he is definitely the biggest reasons for the film's success. And again, it's the type of performance where if it fails, the film fails, I would argue.
Sure, but he couldn't do it by himself. And Hung Chau is a great anchor to his character as his lover's sister. His lover passes away. There's going to be some spoilers in this, everybody. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's a great film. I think Jason and I are going to give it good reviews, even though some people were critical about it. But Hung Chau was great. I loved Hung Chau in The Menu. I talked about that in a previous audio episode of our show, how I thought she was the best part of that film as well. I thought she was great in this. Sadie Sink was great. I thought that they didn't give her a lot to really play with. You know, she's a rebellious teen. We kind of get that. But she took that and ran with it. And she brought a lot of emotion, especially in those final moments. It really built to an apex in that final climax of the film where it just grabs your sponge of a soul and just wrings it out. So, I thought Sadie was great. What's the boy's name? The evangelist, Ty
Simpkins. Yeah, plays Thomas.
I only know him from the Iron Man films, unfortunately, and stuff like that. So I've only seen him around a little bit.
You know what? Actually, just to interject real quick, the reason for that is that he actually took a break. He was a child actor and he was kind of over it. And they went through like 100 different people trying to find someone for Thomas, couldn't settle on it. And the casting director was like, hey, I remember this guy who kind of took a break, but he'd kind of be willing to come out. And they like sent one tape and they were like, get him over here. Like it was like day before shooting or something.
Welcome back. I think he did a good job. I don't know how much I really cared about his character throughout. Maybe only because the gravity was so great around the relationship between Hong Chau's characters, Sadie Sink and Brendan Fraser. And it just kind of like sucked the air out of the room. And then here he comes talking about, you know, And I think maybe that's the point. I think that's how that character is supposed to feel. It's just awkward kind of thing. But I just, this movie landed for me on all notes. I thought it was great. The music, the score, the cinematography, the claustrophobia. Let's start with the fact that this movie opened. I had no idea that it was shot in 4:3.
Same. That was surprising.
Yeah,
but it works.
I mean, very much in the same way as The Lighthouse. We talked about this as well by Eggers. They decided to shoot this to make it more claustrophobic, to make him feel trapped and confined, and just to make him feel straight up larger within the context of the space that they're showing you. So more imposing and stuff like that. He really filled it up. So I thought they did a tremendous job of dealing with trauma and stuff like that. But all the way till the very end, I was along for this ride. Usually I will find myself taking breaks because we take notes for these shows and we do some research and stuff. So I'll get on my phone and look, how do they do this or blah, blah, blah. And I'll miss some things here along I was glued to the screen this entire time and it's all due to the performances. So
definitely. Well, and to your point, so I think that like looking at Sadie Sink's performance, for example, it's an example of how this film is sort of like sneaky good in many different ways. And I would say that like her performance is actually one of those aspects of the film. And for everybody that's watching us here on YouTube, go ahead and check out some of the behind the scenes. Especially there is a breakdown of Darren Aronofsky with Sadie Sink. And they are breaking down the scene where she's just given the crushed up Ambien to Charlie and makes Thomas smoke the bowl and is taking his picture and doing all of that. And in watching that, it's about 12 minutes, right? And in watching that, you realize that so much of like what they're doing throughout is really much more cerebral and premeditated. And there's actually a lot more going on than you at first realize. And so just the way that the camera interacts with the actors on that scene, and in that scene specifically, it talks about how, she's almost invoking this sort of like a zebra pouncing on her prey sort of thing. And the way that, she'll interrogate him and then, walks over and then sort of grabs his walker and like sets it in front of him and it's sort of like caging him into the table, right? And then as he starts to tell his story, she sort of like moves in closer. And there's all these really subtle things that are going on with her performance that you don't really notice until it's pointed out, which is in addition to the fact that she brings an element of complexity and not necessarily, I wouldn't say she's a likable character. I don't think she brings a likableness to it, though she is good about sort of peeling off some of those hard layers as the movie goes on. Right. But I think that, again, to sort of watch what she's doing and again, in her opinion, it's sort of that concept that nobody is the villain in their own story, right? And I think that good actors and actresses, they bring that to their character, so she's able to find the humanity in this character who's been hurt by this person and like a wild animal is acting out against everyone else, but it's because their paw is infected, right? And in a different version of their experience where that doesn't happen to their paw, they're a much different wolf, right? Like, just to continue with the metaphor. And so I think that you get that sense, like she is conniving. Like even her mom comes out and says like she is evil, even if Charlie says otherwise, which I think is sort of Charlie's over positivity or naivete, if you will, or it's just something he has to believe because he's on death's doorstep, which we'll get to some of the character motivations towards the end of this discussion. I want to discuss those things with you in particular, but yeah, I think it's the film is very much like Sadie Sink's performance, where the direction is at first, it kind of just feels like, oh yeah, they just sort of got there, did, shot, reverse shot. And when you actually look at all of the details and the camera movements and the edits, it reminds me very much of two sayings. The first is when it comes to editing, where they're like, a lot of the best editing is invisible. You don't notice it, right? It just keeps you invested in the film. But for me personally, it reminds me, and I know, Ryan, as a friend and a fellow Futurama fan, you're going to be able to appreciate this quote or at least know it. And that is the episode where Bender becomes the god in space and he encounters God as the planet. And halfway through the episode, as well as at the end, one of the sayings that God says is, when you do something right, people won't know you've done anything at all. And that's
Okay.
very much how I feel about the direction of this film. Nothing
Awesome.
about this film is Aronofsky jumping up and waving his hands and being like, look at
It's
me,
very
look at
subtle.
how cool I am. He
Right.
did that with his second film 20 years ago when he was much more youthful and arguably less mature in Requiem for a Dream, which is one
Sure.
of the all-time great art films. I adore that film. It's special to me personally.
It's the one everyone remembers because it's so
Correct.
grandiose. Yes.
Exactly, yeah. But he's like, I'm going to pull out the De Palma split screen and we're going to do, motion capture, or not motion capture, but stop motion, or, what is it, Ryan, where you expose something for like 30 minutes and then you condense it down into like 30 seconds? That one shot where she's cleaning.
Like time lapse or
Yeah,
something
time lapse.
like
Thank you,
hyperlapsing
right? Yeah.
and stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. They do that. They've got these, at the time, very novel camera setups where, it's on a rotating arc and like the camera's following people as
No,
they're
he was
like,
having
running
fun.
around.
He was playing with toys. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
and it very much reminds me of a lot of Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu's arc, right? Where when they're young,
Okay.
it's like, dude, I want to do everything, right? Like with Amores Perros that we looked at on the podcast,
Right.
He was not just content to tell one story. He had to tell 3 stories. And then within that, he had to capture them with as much footage. He famously said he could have made 1 million different cuts with all the footage he cut, right? And so I feel like
Well,
it's
he
the
said,
same thing. It's
you
that
never
young
know if you're going to get
filmmaker
another
thing.
shot. So you want to leave it all out
Yeah.
there, and this might be your only movie you ever get to make, especially being from Mexico. But yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe to that point, maybe Aronofsky has had a very storied career. He's gotten that out of him. He did Mother, he did Requiem, he did these things. So he's like, yeah, you can turn around and do something like The Wrestler 10 years ago, or like this now, where the film just kind of speaks for itself, and he doesn't need to wave his arms and say, look at me. He's more than happy to set his people up for success because now he's a bit more mature and he knows that's the mark of a good leader, a good director, etc. Right? Getting the best out of your people, letting them shine, like a good coach. And I think that's where he's at in his career. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mentioned at the top of the show that this movie was written and based on a stage play. And it feels like one because it all takes place in one location. You can see where it would lend itself very well to almost a one-man, performance or something like that on stage. It went around to very small theaters. Aronofsky said that he saw it in like 100-man theater or something like that, a very small, intimate show. But he really liked the concept of it. And it all takes place, this movie entirely takes place in Charlie's apartment. Did that work for you? Or did you ever feel claustrophobic? Or did that like bother you at any time? Or was there enough changes that were going on? Like, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so here's the thing. Famously, I really enjoy kind of one location films when done well. It's a big risk. It's a big risk, and it doesn't always work, right? But when it works very well. Even something like Reservoir Dogs, most of that takes place in the, warehouse the entire time. Sometimes we go outside to the trunk and then we get right back in,
Yeah.
So there are a lot of films. Night of the Living Dead is another perfect example. Once we're in that house, like we're pretty much in that house for the entire movie,
Sure.
And those films work. There are other films where maybe it doesn't, and I'm not going to be able to call those because I don't retain them. I have long since let them washed out of my memory, right? So,
sure.
But I know them when I see them. But yeah, I think it works again. So part of it is the Brendan Fraser performance, because if you have that's why I said this movie lives or dies by the performance, because it is all him the entire time in this room with no additional locations and very few additional actors to switch things up.
People just come visit him and come in and out of his life, but he's there the whole time.
And that brings up a perfect example of why I think the film works, as well as illustrating one of those points from earlier about the subtlety of Aronofsky's direction, which is that a large part of the way that he wanted to shoot this film is he used this metaphor of Charlie being the sun, right? Not just in terms of like having a lot of warmth that exudes out of him for everyone else, even if he can't shine that warmth on himself, but also from the standpoint of these 3 other characters. Everything is constantly revolving around him.
Sure.
And so you'll see certain instances like even in that scene that I was talking about earlier, where he's passed out from the Ambien, like you'll see that there's a shot where it's a wide shot and it kind of has him in the foreground and it sort of like dollies across and it keeps him in there. And you see the other two people, you know, one of them stationary, but then she's sort of like almost orbiting around him, you know,
Correct.
to get to her like next sort of stage. And so there's this theme, even down to the standpoint of shooting her with cool blue light versus him with warm orange light to differentiate the two, but then giving her more orange highlights as the film goes on to express that she is almost absorbing some of that warmth from his sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And
then the film resolves with her almost haloed by light. Like she is standing in the doorway as she's leaving and he's about to pass away and all of that. And she's reading this monologue or this essay. The light is, you know, creating lens flares and stuff. It's behind her, haloing her. So that's a good point. I know that to add to what you're saying, one of the challenges that they talked about having, Libatique was saying was, here you have this, you know, 400 pound man that can't move. He's on the couch.
Yeah.
So you don't want it to just be proscenium view of Brendan Fraser the whole time. It's going to be too confining to shoot this in 4:3 and not have any camera movement, no character movement. He can't get up and walk around the room and monologue or anything. So they pulled the couch out to the center of the room, which allowed Sadie Sink to do that, what you're saying, orbit around. And it also acted as a character motivation, she said, to almost taunt him because he was so large that he couldn't look over his shoulder. He was, you know, restricted in movement. His airway was clogged and all of the things. So when she was like walking around him, it was almost taunting him. And she said that she used that almost as a performance cue to act as like a devil character of sorts, like the Temptation of Christ or something like that, where, you know, she was taunting him as she was walking around him and he couldn't do anything but just succumb to her words and emotion. And, you know, that would help evoke things out of Brendan Fraser too, which I thought was a great volley and a really interesting decision to just, by moving that couch out to the center of the room, something as simple as that. Now it allowed your characters to walk around him 360 degrees, allowed for camera movement and crane shots and steady cam movement and stuff like that, different lighting setups and all the things. So you're absolutely right. That was interesting.
Yeah. And one of the important things to remember too, as well, when it comes to the Ellie character played by Sadie Sink, is that like she's been very hurt by this man who is her father, and walked out on her at 8 years old. And here she is 8 to 10 years later, and that has an impact on her, you know? This entire film, you've touched on it earlier, is really about trauma and the response that we as humans have to that trauma. And it looks like a number of different ways, you know? And I think that so much of why this works is because, you know, everybody's grief is given a level of respect by the actor that is playing them. I think the only person that really maybe doesn't have that level of grief is the Thomas character, which is maybe what you were responding to earlier with not really engaging in his plight so much, you know. It just it never really felt like it was all of, you know, we didn't feel that rejection early on. He ended up lying about it, and that was kind of weird, and then it resolved really easily where they're just like, oh yeah, no worries, come back home, son. And as far as a character reaction, that perhaps isn't satisfying, but what I will say is it very much is on brand with the film's theme, the overall theme of this film. You know, this is not something that we necessarily always discuss about films on this program. We do some, you know, part of it is just time, right? We rattle on forever as it is, and we have to leave certain things on the table, right?
No.
You know? But I think that when you really break this film down, you know, the theme, it's sort of two parts of theme that work in conjunction with one another. One of those is, again, our response to trauma and how much that affects who we are as people and individuals, especially when it comes to the negative aspects and the pain associated with that. But it also is the scene, reflected by the scene, where he has the freak out, breakdown, whatever you want to call it, right? Where he contacts all of his students and he's like, I don't care what you fucking write, just make sure it's fucking honest, right? Like with all caps. And it's what ends up leading to his dismissal from the position ultimately. But in that moment, what he's like, what he's saying and what the film is saying through that is that if everybody had been honest, we would not be here right now. With regards to Charlie, with regards to Ellie, with regards to the mom character, played by Samantha Morton. Actually, I didn't catch that until I saw it on the credits afterward. Small but memorable scene, right?
She's great.
One of the tragic things about this movie is the fact that, and the story rather, and these characters, let's say, is that you get the sense that like things could have been so different for all of these people. Like all of these people were good people that could have made this work. And Charlie made a huge, huge mistake that he would probably never outlive. And quite frankly, if he was a strong enough person and could find that strength, which, you know, it's also clear that he's in the throes of depression. And so subtly it's talking about how depression can prevent you from finding that strength, and all of that he would have needed to maybe live a different lifestyle that he just unfortunately couldn't because of the ramifications of the trauma that he experienced and the subsequent grief, right? But the most tragic thing, like I said, of all is that like the scene with the ex-wife played by Samantha Morton, by the end of it, we see that they still very much care for each other. This is the first time they've seen each other in like 10 years or something like that. And there's very little resentment from both sides, very, very much less than we see traditionally expressed in film. She even sort of tenderly lays her heart on his chest. Charlie's under the guise of checking his heart, but we obviously notice that she just is feeling this comfort, and there's obviously still this care there. Charlie very obviously cares for his daughter to a fault, right? You get the sense that if anything, he would be enabling to a degree if he was in her life more, but and maybe she'd still fuck around, but she certainly wouldn't be as cruel and vindictive as she seems to be towards everybody, right? And once again, because nobody could be honest, because Charlie couldn't be honest with himself about needing help as a result of this depression that he dropped into as the result of his grief from his this person that he loved dying, as well as being honest with himself about the ramifications of walking out on his family and doing what he needed to do to make amends to them and make things correct, right? If if the ex-wife character had been honest about the fact that she thought her daughter was she literally says like she's evil at one point. I never let you see her because I didn't want you to know how evil she was. But Charlie very clearly would never think that about it. And so perhaps there's a scenario where she's honest with him, says this, and he's like, you know what, that's not true. Let me play more of a part in her life. I kind of felt like you guys had things and everything was good. I didn't realize it was this. And we can just keep breaking down these layers. And then that's why the Ty Summers Thomas character exists, is because that also reinforces that. Literally, very easily, all he has to do is be honest with his parents and be like, hey, I did this. Can I come home? And they're like, absolutely, son. Get your ass back here. We love you, you little scamp.
Right.
All it took was honesty, even if it came from someone else. In this case, the Sadie Sink character, who I believe was trying to be vindictive, but obviously Charlie can't believe that because of everything that we discussed here. So once again, just this notion of like so much of the negative aspects of our life and these spirals that we find ourselves in emotionally and otherwise, has to do with the fact that we can't be honest with ourselves about where we are and what is necessary, for someone like me, it would be like getting help, right? Like I like to be super reliant, but there are times where I'll need help and I have to be okay asking for it. And if I can't, that's a detriment to myself and other people. And if I can be honest about that, then my life can improve,
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of that in this film that I appreciated from a thematic standpoint.
I have no flaws. I'm good. Give me those 2 pizzas.
Also, let's mention on that note that this is at times a very difficult watch. If you're somebody that does struggle with an eating disorder and overeating, or you have, I imagine it's going to hit very close to home, right? The same way that if you're someone who deals with a sick family member, a movie about cancer is going to be harder for you to watch. I do think that might be the case, because even for me watching, when you're watching him literally just shove entire pieces of fried chicken into his mouth, or the scene where he literally chokes on a meatball sandwich, is saved by his friend, And then very helplessly, she gives him back the sandwich, and very helplessly, he looks at it, and you know he's going to go right back to eating it. And that's just fucking tragic, man. It breaks your heart to watch that. It breaks your heart for him. It breaks your heart for her, especially knowing that his lover was her brother, and she had to watch him go through the opposite, where he starved himself to death because of the pressures of his religion and his father. And again, it breaks your heart for everyone involved.
So real quick too, not only are you having to watch those hard moments, but you're having to listen to them. I don't know if you heard the sound design, but the Foley work and ADR was like cranked to 11. You could hear the grease in that chicken when he was eating it, and just the mouth tones of the pizza when he's shoveling it in. It really made you uncomfortable. Hearing people eat with their mouth open and stuff like that, I'm real sensitive to that anyways. But, as he's gobbling all this up, the sound design was really, really good. It was very well done. It made you really experience that on a whole fourth dimension. I will also add the music was very haunting. It was done by a guy named Rob Simonson. He's done some stuff here and there. He did 500 Days of Summer. He did Seeking a Friend for the End of the World, which we've covered on this show a few seasons ago. And he even did Ghostbusters Afterlife. But this was his first pairing with Aronofsky. He really wanted to knock it out of the park. He came up with using these things called overtone flutes.
Okay.
And I guess they sound somewhere between a flute and a didgeridoo, but they almost sound like what he felt like whale sounds would be underwater. Really droning, muffled tones, like I said, almost like a didgeridoo. And he found the best person in the world that plays these things, custom builds them, and he had this guy build a 21-foot long one. Custom made for this film to give these really long, low tones. And I guess by the end of the film, when he's eating those two pizzas and that scene you just described, there's almost a chugga chugga sound with these tones that build and ramp up and give like an impending doom of like what's about to come.
Yeah.
And so this sound design and the score, I almost kind of figured that Trent Reznor would have scored this, or Boy from Radiohead, Johnny Greenwood, something like that, because of the ethereal nature of some of the sound design and score, kind of match with what we've heard from those guys in other films like PTA's movies and stuff like that. So, but I was delighted to find that this was Rob Simonson, and he crushed it. I thought that the swelling score, because there's a lot of emotional strings as well. In those emotional moments when they're crying and stuff like that, like at the very end. So it's like he can give danger and build anxiety and tension very well, but also make you cry in those moments as well, and really wrench your guts. So this was crazy, man. This was very experiential. Now, real quick, before we go, I do want to ask you, because the critics of this film, and I want to get your opinion on this, because you're more story-based and narrative-based than I am. For those that don't know, Jason's written several novels and edited several novels. So where I'm more like behind-the-scenes on set guy, he's very much more in tune with story and narrative structure and stuff like that than I can be. I'm more of a cretin when it comes to that stuff. So a lot of the critics are saying that you strip away Fraser and Sink and Chau, all these great performances, and you give it to lesser actors or what have you. The script itself and the characters themselves are all very ham-fisted in one note. That the film is consistently asking you to feel for this character of Charlie, but it's also showing you, it's confirming society's view of him, that he is disgusting. They're showing you him as a sickly person with a tragic health problem, and they're making it gross. They're not showing you that with empathy, and it's only through Brendan Fraser's performance that you feel that. Sadie Sink is just a teenage brat that doesn't like anything, and then at the end she has this character turnaround where it's like, I miss you, Dad, but because it's Sadie Sink and she brings this weight to it, then that adds all this extra dimension to the character. But the script itself and the film itself doesn't deserve the rapport and attention it's getting. It's simply all to the performances. I disagree. I was curious your take on it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair, very cynical review of this film, right? Like, if I passionately disliked this film for any number of reasons, I could certainly color it in that light. So I get that, right? Like, we've talked about this before, where if you like a film, you're going to excuse away certain things. And if you dislike the film, then you're going to use that as evidence for why it is not good, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's definitely what's going on with those instances. I think that when it comes, oftentimes there is this, what I would call a misinterpretation about what a screenplay is, or what a screenplay should be, rather. And so often it seems as though people are of the idea that a screenplay should be a short novel, should be an expeditious novel. You're telling a 400-page story in $1.20, or less, sure. 90. So, first of all, I very much disagree with that, right? With a book, it's the written word, it's you and the audience, and it's nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. Okay?
There is no Brendan Fraser. Yeah, right.
Correct, right? But furthermore, let me ask you this. If I told you that I was going to make a movie and it had one of the most stellar screenplays that you've ever had, and I am going to shoot the entire film in 7-minute wide takes, and I am going to get mediocre actors to deliver. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to make sure that it's very well shot. I'm not really, because the screenplay is so strong, we don't really need to focus on score or sound design or any of that, right?
Sure.
Like, does that make a good movie? No, because a screenplay is the sum of all, or because a good movie, rather, is the sum of all of these parts together.
That was my take.
You
right.
know what I mean?
So Brendan Fraser's performance carries it. So fucking what? Yeah, he crushes it, and he makes a great movie. Like, that's awesome. Like, why? Why are you saying that? Like, it's a bad thing. Like, yeah, maybe he did take a lag. It's Sam Hunter's first screenplay, and it's his first like big, huge breakout in Hollywood. So one might forgive him if the screenplay and the characters weren't fully fleshed out. But then Aronofsky comes in rips shit with all his badass actors and Matthew Libatique and makes a smoking movie. Like, that was my take on it. I was hoping you would say that. I wasn't sure like how I definitely see their critique. I do. I see what you're saying, but you can't do that. You can't say, this pizza would be good. It's only good because of the sauce. It's like, but is it fucking good ass pizza? Like, some of the best pizza I've had is like, it's the simplest. And it's just, the basil and the margarita pizza, whatever, but because the ingredients are so fucking fresh, you know what I mean? Like, okay, so maybe it's basic as fuck and you strip it away, but you can't deconstruct a movie like that. And, I think you can, when you're saying like only the cinematography is good, but when you're talking about performances from actors and the direction from the director, that's the fucking movie, bro. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you can't unbake the cake. Like, it's all in there.
Yeah. And so there's two other things that I would like to say on this note. I think, first of all, one of the things that I said very early on in this discussion was that this movie is sneaky good in a lot of itself because it goes so far out of its way to not call attention to what it's doing.
Sure.
I think that that's what a lot of people are referring to, because I think that anytime you have more subtle aspects of filmmaking, it's difficult for people to rely on. Like I said, they're not sitting there with a note, they don't have the ability, or they're not sitting there pausing it and writing something out. And then that spurs an idea about something and makes you think about something else, and you run with that and you make a note so that you can bring it up later in a podcast, Right. It's like I said, I think that there's a difference between critical reviews where we do sit here and write all these things down and analyze them. And we're going to either make an article or a video or a what have you afterwards. And so, we can pretty much very immediately tell how much meat is on that bone. And just by the nature of this discussion, I think that you can tell that there's a lot. And the reason that there's a lot is my second point, which is that I forget if I've brought this up on the show before, but there is a Paul Schrader quote. And it's one of I think that if you want to understand like what and I think many other people believe the duty of a screenplay is, I think that this quote summarizes it best. And that is that a screenplay is not in and of itself a work of art. A screenplay is an invitation to collaborate on a work of art. So a screenplay is not a finished thing in and of itself. A screenplay is a blueprint for a house. And the blueprint can be the best blueprints in the world. But if I don't get the right contractor and the right drywall and the right fixtures and a good electrician and lay a solid foundation with solid rebar, blah, 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 right? It's going to suck. It doesn't matter how great the blueprints are. So if the blueprints set up a wonderful finished product, then you can't sit here and say that the blueprints sucked and that the other people just made it better because of what they are. Like, they worked from that blueprint, and they will argue otherwise. They will say, without this, we could not have done what we did.
Right.
And so I think that speaks to the success of it.
And Aronofsky's direction and the score and all of that. Yeah. And Libatique's cinematography that evokes emotion. Even down to the weather choices, because you're stuck in this apartment the entire movie. They were able to bracket this film day by day, and it even has, as you watch the film, it starts off and you go through the week, and counting down on his last week, on the last week of this man's life. And every day has different weather. And they would, choose some of these weather choices based on the mood that was going to happen that day, or some of the confrontation, or how it started versus how it ends, and stuff like that. So right down to the pouring rain and thunder, in some of the most intense moments. So little ham-fisted, but I think it's subtle enough that it works, and it, definitely worked on me.
Yeah, same here. So as we wrap up this movie, like we do with all films, we're going to go ahead and give you some couple features here. One of them is 3 adjectives. The other is our star rating. But first, do want to remind you guys, please go ahead and like this video, subscribe to our channel, and then leave comments right here, right? Let us know what you thought about the film. Let us know what you thought about our response to the film. Do you agree with some of the critics of this film? Do you tend to agree with us that was able to overlook them? We'd love to hear what you have to think. So for 3 adjectives, Ryan, I will toss to you to kick us off.
I'm going to go with gut-wrenching, because this one really rang it out of me. I don't know what it was about it, but the magic trick worked. The next one is empathy, because at the end of the day, it's showing you, I think that, the critics are right. It's showing you a lot of gross things. And like I said earlier, a lot of that is exacerbated by the sound design and stuff like that. But, you have to see through that and get into the heart of the matter. And it really kind of forces you to be an empathetic person in this regard. And the last one is character study. Because I think if I was going to describe this film to somebody, and that's what this 3 adjective feature is all about, as if I could summarize this very shortly to somebody, I think this is a character study. I think that you don't go anywhere. You're kind of forced to just sit down and watch these people all interact with their grief and trauma. And it kind of peels back the layer of that onion, and it kind of forces you to look inward a little bit at some of your own. So I think it works on all those levels personally. How about you, bud?
My first adjective is honest, because I feel like that's not only a theme of the film, but I think that it's honest in what it shows us. And also, to your point, being honest about not glamorizing this dude's life, and showing you a lot of the lesser aspects. We didn't even mention, the film opens with him masturbating, and then after he orgasms, he immediately has a very close to a heart attack. And again, every time that he goes on these binges, it's almost, we didn't even mention this, but the film is sort of like, it treats his plight and his addiction to food like any other addiction, right? But instead of watching the guy go on a liquor binge or a cocaine binge, he goes on a food binge. And somehow it's almost even worse than watching some of those other iterations of addiction. Maybe it's just because all of us can relate to that.
We didn't mention his trauma because of Christianity. We didn't mention his trauma because of being gay. And being chastised for being a homosexual, but, having to deal with the conflict of leaving his family behind as he came to terms with the fact that he's a gay man. These are all things that Sam Hunter built into the script in the stage play, because he's gay and was a former Christian and had to deal with a lot of those traumas as well, and was also obese and ate his way into a bad situation because of dealing with the first 2 traumas I just mentioned, and being judged for being gay while being in church and having all those conflicts. And he had to lose 130 pounds. And he said that he wrote this script because he found a way out, but he wanted to look at a character, do a character study, if you will, about somebody that couldn't find their way out and saw their way to the bitter end, where he would have ended up had he not found help. So I didn't mean to interject, but when you're talking about trauma and honesty and those things, I thought that, you're absolutely right. I love those themes, and it goes even deeper than that. They handle a lot in this movie. It's very, very heavy.
Yeah, which leads to my second adjective, which is emotional. And that doesn't really need any further description. We've been talking for 45 minutes about all the ways it's emotional. And then raw, again, sort of tied in with that honesty. They show you the handle that he has to use to get in bed, and they give you those couple minutes of just watching him struggle with being overweight. And so again,
in the shower,
because of his through the performance, we maintain that element of compassion, but the film is also not afraid to not shy away and say, hey, look, we're not advocating this or even saying this isn't okay. Like, this dude has a problem, with food, right, and it has all of these manifestations. Again, the same way any other addiction, we're going to show the heroin addict losing all the weight and getting scabs, right? Like, we're going to show the other side of being addicted to food and everything that goes along with that. So honest, emotional, raw, all of this amounting to a star rating from old Jason of 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really, really appreciated this film. A difficult watch, but at the same time, it was funny. When I immediately after finishing this film, I kind of felt like, wow, that was a bit rough. Really appreciated the film. Very emotional, leaves you in a raw state. There you go, raw again. But I didn't think like I necessarily wanted to or needed to watch the film right away again. And I still don't feel that way, but I think that I'm going to go back and rewatch it sooner than I thought.
Oh, I'll definitely watch it.
It kind of stayed with me.
Yeah. This is not so rough to watch. That it was rough emotionally, but it wasn't like Requiem where I needed like a shower afterwards. And I felt like I had scabies or something. Like I felt dirty after that. This was just laid bare, it made me want to call my parents and tell them sorry for everything, that I've ever done. So, How about I'm right there with you. I'm giving this one 4.5 stars as well. Awesome. It's not, you got to keep those 5 stars in the clutch for those, masterpieces. But dude, for $3 million, you're not going to get a better $3 million experience out of me. I can't
believe they spent $3 million on that movie. That's insane.
Oh, they didn't have to buy
really good product for $3 million. 100%.
There's only like 5 actors. So
absolutely. So yeah, great movie, The Whale. I do know it's on streaming. So go ahead and check that out as well. Be sure to visit esotericacinema.com for some more of us. If you want that thing, we understand 45 plus minutes is probably plenty, but in case you want any more, esotericacinema.com. I'm Jason Peters. He's Ryan Siebold. This has been Esoterica Cinema. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Enjoy the movies.